Have you ever wondered why your faith feels so small compared to others, yet God still seems near you? Have you ever felt ashamed of your doubts, as if little faith was something to hide rather than something to offer? And have you ever asked yourself why God appears to lean closer, not to the strongest souls but to the weakest ones? Saint Thérèse of Lisieux reveals a truth that gently overturns everything we assume about faith. It is not great faith that most attracts God's attention, but little faith offered with trust. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux once said, "God does not search for towering faith. He bends down toward the soul that dares to believe a little and trust completely." Subscribe if you wish to walk this little way and discover how small faith becomes a place of encounter with God. Thérèse lived her entire spiritual life convinced of one thing: God is not impressed by strength, he is moved by dependence. She believed that faith, when small and fragile, becomes precious because it leaves room for God to act. Large faith often leans on confidence in itself. Little faith leans entirely on Him. She once wrote, "What pleases Jesus is that He sees me love my littleness and my poverty." This includes the poverty of faith. Little faith does not boast. It does not feel secure. It does not pretend to understand. It does not claim certainty. Instead, little faith whispers, "I don't see clearly, but I trust. I don't feel strong, but I come. I don't understand, but I stay." This is why it draws God so close. Imagine a child trying to cross a room. A confident child runs ahead without looking back. A hesitant child takes small steps, constantly glancing toward the parent. Which child receives more attention? Which one draws the parent's eyes, hands, and presence? Thérèse understood this instinctively. She believed that souls with little faith look toward God more often. They rely on Him more frequently. They cling rather than stride. And this clinging delights the heart of God. In daily life, little faith often feels uncomfortable. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like weakness. It feels like not knowing what God is doing. But Thérèse teaches that this discomfort is not a failure. It is an opening. Where certainty ends, trust begins. Think of moments when your faith feels thin, when prayer feels dry, when answers do not come, when hope feels fragile, when confidence disappears. Thérèse would say, this is precisely where God is closest. Not because He enjoys your struggle, but because your small faith makes space for His tenderness. A soul that knows it does not have strong faith is a soul that does not rely on itself, and a soul that does not rely on itself rests easily in God. Large faith can sometimes speak loudly. Little faith listens. Large faith may move forward boldly. Little faith waits quietly. Large faith may feel heroic. Little faith feels honest. And God's attention is always drawn to honesty. Thérèse never tried to feel strong in her faith. She chose instead to be truthful. When she felt nothing, she still trusted. When she understood nothing, she still loved. Her faith remained small, and that smallness became her greatest offering. Little faith attracts God because it gives Him permission to be everything the soul cannot be on its own. Little faith attracts God's attention because it carries something rare and precious, humility without disguise. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that when faith is small, the soul stops pretending. It no longer tries to appear certain, strong, or spiritually impressive. It stands before God exactly as it is, unsure, fragile, dependent. And this honesty opens heaven. Thérèse wrote, "It is trust and nothing but trust that must lead us to love." Notice what she does not say. She does not say clarity must lead us, or strength, or certainty. She says trust, and trust is born most easily where faith feels small. Little faith does not argue with God. It does not negotiate. It does not demand explanations. It simply stays. Imagine a soul that understands everything, explains everything, and feels spiritually confident. That soul may pray, but often from a place of control. Little faith, however, prays from need. It comes empty-handed. It waits. It hopes quietly. It does not know what God will do, and precisely for that reason, it looks at Him more often. This is why little faith keeps the heart turned toward God. Think of the times when your faith feels fragile. You still pray, but without enthusiasm. You still believe, but without certainty. You still hope, but without clarity. There is a temptation in those moments to think you are failing. Thérèse would gently correct you. You are not failing. You are depending. Little faith does not push forward. It leans inward. It leans into God's presence. It leans into His patience. It leans into His mercy. And God responds to leaning. Saint Thérèse understood that God delights in the soul that does not hide its poverty. She believed that when a soul admits, "I believe," but weakly, heaven does not turn away. Heaven bends closer, because that admission leaves no room for pride, no room for self-reliance, no room for illusion. Little faith creates space. Picture a small candle in a dark room. Its flame is weak, flickering, easily shaken, yet the darkness gathers around it and the eye is drawn to its light. A blazing fire may fill the space, but a small flame stands out in the silence. God's attention is drawn in the same way, not to the soul that overwhelms the room with certainty, but to the one that shines quietly with trust. Thérèse lived many moments of spiritual darkness. She felt doubt. She felt emptiness. She felt nothing at times, and yet she continued to choose trust, not because she felt it strongly, but because she loved God deeply. Her faith remained small, and her trust became immense. Little faith is not about feeling confident. It is about choosing to stay, choosing to hope, choosing to love when understanding is absent. This is why God draws near to it, because little faith does not compete with Him. It does not replace Him. It depends on Him. Little faith becomes powerful when it begins to resemble spiritual childhood. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux did not see childlike faith as naive or immature. She saw it as the most realistic posture a soul can take before God. A child knows what it lacks. A child knows it cannot carry itself. A child knows it must trust or fall. This is why little faith attracts God's attention. It mirrors the heart of a child. Thérèse wrote, "To be little is to recognize one's nothingness and to expect everything from God." This sentence contains the entire mystery. Little faith does not expect from itself. It expects from God. Spiritual childhood does not ask, "How strong is my faith?" It asks, "Who is holding me?" When faith feels small, the soul stops relying on understanding. It stops measuring progress. It stops comparing itself to others. It becomes simple. And simplicity is the climate where God's tenderness thrives. Imagine a child walking in the dark. The child does not analyze the darkness. The child does not calculate steps. The child simply reaches for a hand. That reaching is faith, not because it is strong, but because it is real. This is how Thérèse lived. During seasons when she felt no spiritual consolation, no emotional warmth, no clarity, she did not panic. She did not accuse herself of failing. She chose to remain small. She chose to trust without feeling. And that quiet choice drew God closer than any emotional certainty could. Little faith does not say, "I see." It says, "I trust you to see for me." This is why God bends toward it. Large faith can sometimes speak in confident declarations. Little faith speaks in simple persistence. Large faith may move mountains. Little faith stays at the feet of God. Large faith can feel heroic. Little faith feels honest. And honesty is irresistible to God. Spiritual childhood frees the soul from spiritual performance. There is no pressure to appear holy, strong, or certain. The soul rests in truth. And truth opens the heart wider than effort ever could. Thérèse believed that God is drawn to the soul that dares to be small, because such a soul does not compete with grace. It does not try to replace God's action with its own strength. It allows God to act fully. Think of how often faith becomes heavy when you try to carry it yourself. You feel pressure to believe more, feel more, understand more. But Thérèse teaches that faith becomes light when you stop carrying it and let God carry you. Little faith does not demand proof. It does not require explanation. It does not insist on clarity. It simply remains present, and presence is enough. When you choose spiritual childhood, your little faith becomes a place of rest for God. He is not resisted. He is not questioned. He is welcomed. This is why God's attention is drawn so gently, so consistently, to the smallest faith offered with trust. Little faith has a hidden power. It transforms weakness into an offering. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux believed that God is not offended by human weakness. He is moved by it when it is placed in his hands. Where strong faith often tries to overcome weakness, little faith simply presents it. This is why little faith draws God close. Thérèse wrote, "I offer myself as I am, with all my imperfections." She did not wait to feel strong in order to believe. She believed while feeling weak. And this made her faith pure because it was no longer about success, it was about surrender. Weakness frightens us. We want to hide it, fix it, or overcome it before bringing it to God. But Thérèse teaches that weakness is not a problem to solve, it is a gift to offer. When faith is small, weakness is visible, and visibility creates honesty. Little faith says, "I cannot. I am afraid. I am tired. I do not understand." And then it adds, "But I trust you." That addition changes everything. Imagine placing something broken into someone's hands. If you insist on fixing it yourself first, you delay help. If you place it immediately in the hands of one who loves you, repair begins. Little faith places brokenness into God's hands without delay. This is why God's attention is drawn to it. Thérèse understood that grace flows where the soul stops pretending. When the heart admits weakness, it becomes open. When it pretends strength, it closes. God's tenderness enters through openness. In daily life, little faith often feels humiliating. It feels like praying without certainty, believing without clarity, hoping without reassurance. Yet Thérèse insists that this humble state is deeply pleasing to God. It reveals a heart that trusts him more than its own stability. She lived through moments of interior darkness where faith felt nearly absent. Still, she chose to offer that absence as an act of love. She wrote that in these moments, her faith was not felt, but it was chosen. And chosen faith, even when small, has immense value. Little faith does not eliminate weakness. It transforms weakness into closeness. God is drawn to the soul that does not hide its fragility, not because fragility is attractive in itself, but because it allows God to be everything the soul cannot be on its own. This is the paradox of the little way. The weaker the soul feels, the more it leans. The more it leans, the closer God comes. The closer God comes, the safer the soul becomes. Think of the moments when your faith feels thin. Those moments are not failures. They are invitations. Invitations to stop relying on strength and start relying on love. Thérèse teaches that the smallest act of trust offered in weakness carries immense spiritual weight. It touches God's heart because it allows him to act freely. Little faith changes prayer in a profound and gentle way. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that when faith is small, prayer no longer depends on feelings, clarity, or strength. It becomes simpler, quieter, and more intimate, not because the soul has mastered prayer, but because it has stopped trying to control it. Little faith does not try to pray well. It simply comes. Thérèse wrote, "For me, prayer is a simple glance toward heaven. A glance is not an effort. It is not a method. It is not a performance. It is presence. When faith feels strong, prayer can become ambitious. The soul tries to concentrate, to feel something, to say the right words, to reach God through effort. But when faith feels small, the soul stops striving and begins resting. And rest is the true soil of prayer. Imagine entering prayer when you feel weak, distracted, uncertain. You have nothing impressive to offer. No clarity, no emotion, no confidence. All you can do is remain there, quiet, empty, open. Thérèse would say, this is perfect prayer. Because little faith does not push upward. It opens inward. Prayer becomes a place where the soul allows itself to be seen rather than improved. The heart no longer hides its dryness or confusion. It simply presents them to God. And this honesty draws God closer than eloquence ever could. Little faith prays like a child speaks to a parent at night. Tired, simple, unfinished. Words may trail off. Thoughts may wander. Silence may dominate. But love remains. And love is what God listens to. Thérèse believed that God does not measure prayer by attention span or emotional intensity. He measures it by trust. And trust is often strongest when faith feels smallest. When faith is little, Prayer becomes short but sincere. A sigh, a whisper, a name spoken softly, a simple Jesus. These are not failures of prayer, they are its essence. Little faith frees the soul from discouragement in prayer. When you stop expecting yourself to feel strong, you stop judging your prayer. You stop quitting when prayer feels dry. You stay, and staying is what pleases God. Thérèse remained faithful to prayer even when she felt nothing. She did not demand consolation. She did not withdraw. She stayed quietly, offering her emptiness as an act of love. And she believed this kind of prayer was especially precious to God, because it costs more love to pray without feeling than with feeling. Little faith turns prayer into relationship instead of achievement. The soul no longer asks, "Am I praying well?" It asks, "Am I here?" And being here is enough. As prayer becomes simpler, the heart becomes lighter. The soul begins to experience God not as distant, but as gentle, close, and attentive. Not because faith has grown stronger, but because resistance has softened. Little faith ultimately leads the soul to a place Saint Thérèse of Lisieux cherished above all else: deep peace. Not the peace that comes from understanding everything, nor the peace that comes from feeling spiritually secure, but the peace that flows from belonging. When faith is small, the soul stops trying to stand on its own and discovers the safety of being held. Thérèse believed that peace is not the reward of strong faith, but the fruit of trust. She wrote, "Perfect peace consists in doing the will of God, even when the heart feels nothing." This peace does not depend on certainty or clarity. It rests on one quiet truth: I am loved even now. Little faith does not try to control outcomes. It does not demand answers. It does not insist on emotional reassurance. It simply remains in God's presence. And remaining is enough. When the soul accepts that its faith is small, it stops fighting itself. It stops measuring its spiritual state. It stops fearing that weakness will push God away. Instead, it begins to rest. Not because everything makes sense, but because God is trusted to make sense of everything in His time. This is why little faith attracts God's attention. It does not resist His closeness. It welcomes it. Imagine a child falling asleep in a parent's arms. The child does not analyze safety. The child does not understand protection. The child simply rests. That rest is faith, not because it is strong, but because it is surrendered. Thérèse lived this rest daily. She did not seek to feel confident in her faith. She sought to remain small. She trusted that God would lift her when she could not walk. She trusted that He would see her love even when she felt empty. And this trust brought her peace even in darkness. Little faith changes how the soul faces life. Difficulties lose their power to terrify. Uncertainty loses its sharp edge. Weakness loses its shame. The soul begins to move gently, no longer driven by fear of failure or desire to appear strong. It lives quietly, faithfully, lovingly, confident not in itself but in God's care. This peace does not come suddenly. It grows softly, like dawn light entering a room, and it remains steady even when emotions fluctuate, because it is anchored not in feeling, but in trust. Saint Thérèse teaches that God delights in the soul that dares to trust Him with little faith. Such a soul does not overwhelm Him with certainty. It gives Him space. It allows Him to be Father, Savior, Protector, and Love. And this is the final mystery of the little way. Little faith does not limit God, it invites Him. If your faith feels small today, do not be afraid. If your trust feels fragile, do not hide it. If your heart feels unsure, do not pull away. Offer your little faith honestly and rest, because God's attention is not drawn to strength, but to trust, not to certainty, but to openness, not to greatness, but to love. And love, even when small, is always enough.